All right, Dr. Bergsma, I want to go back to what you call the lack of Zion theology in the Pentateuch. That is, there's really no mention of Jerusalem, of, an emphasis on Judah, King David, all this stuff. And that there's actually more of an emphasis on northern sites, and it would play more into the hands of the Samaritans, who, the southern kingdom is in competition with post-exile. And so that makes it even more unlikely to be a result of, scribes or priests editing it during the exilic period.
Yeah. So let's recall what the exilic period is like. So the Jews come back from Babylon and they rebuild the city of Jerusalem and they settle in the area of Judah around Jerusalem. There is a rival group that also claims the heritage of Moses and of Israel to the north, a group that we come to call the Samaritans. That group claimed, and they actually did, descend from the northern 10 tribes. Okay, some parts of the Bible make it sound, kind of in a naive reading, that like the northern territory was completely evacuated by the Assyrians in the year 721 and nobody was there. That's a bit of an exaggeration. We know that actually a lot of the poor farmers and so on of the northern tribes were actually left behind, and they intermarried with other groups that the Assyrian Empire brought into northern Israel, and that kind of mixed race community became known as the Samaritans, but they claimed to be the descendants of the northern tribes, and truly they were. At least they had they had other blood in them, but they did have the blood of the northern tribes in them, especially of Ephraim and Manasseh, the tribes of Joseph. And it was particularly in the classical tribal territory of Ephraim and Manasseh that the Samaritans lived. So you have this rival religious community to the north, the Samaritans. They also claim the heritage of ancient Israel, and they have the Pentateuch. And surprise, surprise, the Pentateuch actually supports their claims better than it supports the claims of the Judeans, because Joseph is kind of the hero of the Pentateuch. And his sons get the blessing from Jacob. And so and his two tribes are the biggest. You combine them and they're bigger than Judah when you look at the tribes that wander through the wilderness. And Joshua comes from the tribe of Ephraim, and he's the last leader in the Pentateuch. And where they have their temple on Mount Gerizim, and that's where Deuteronomy, that's roughly the location where Deuteronomy says to ratify the covenant at the end of Moses' life, the commandments that he gives in Deuteronomy 11 and in Deuteronomy 26. He says to go to Ebal and Gerizim, these two hills. They're on either side of the city of Shechem, which was the capital of the Samaritans, and they had their temple on Mount Gerizim. So the Pentateuch really supports the claim of the rival Samaritans to the north. So how can we possibly imagine the Judean priests in Jerusalem concocting this document in, say, the 400s when it's why would they concoct a document that actually supports the claims of their rivals? Now, many scholars now are recognizing this problem. So what's become popular is an idea that, the Samaritans and the Judean priests got together and they worked out a compromise document, and that's what the Pentateuch is. Okay, there's so many problems with that. The first thing is, I'm like, well, that is convenient. My whole life, all the scholarship has been talking about how the Judeans and the Samaritans were at each other's throats when the Judeans came back from Babylon. Now, all of a sudden...
Now they're singing Kumbaya together.
Right. All of a sudden, when we need them to get along in order to save our theory, then we can make up that they were, like you say, that they were all sitting around the campfire singing Kumbaya. So how conveniently we can just radically change our reconstructions of history when it suits us to save a politically correct theory. So there's that issue. The second issue is, it's just kind of absurd to think of, kind of like a committee, between between these rival temples, both of whom are claiming to be the only proper place to worship the Lord, you know. And what are we going to do? Shuttle, you know, scholars back and forth and have them hammer out kind of like some kind of UN document, you know. It's so modern, you know. It's this kind of this modern anachronism, like foisted back into this ancient period. And then the third major problem is, you know, again, in this scenario put forward by Gary Knoppers and other scholars, you know, we have this scenario where the Judean priests and the Samaritan priests are getting along and hammering out this document, and they come up with a compromise document. The problem is, it's not a compromise document. Like, it never mentions Jerusalem. It does mention Shechem,
right,
the capital of Samaria, a lot, and it gives a lot of value and dignity to the site of Shechem. And it mentions Gerizim, and it mentions Ebal, and it gives them a lot of dignity. It gives the primary glory to Joseph, and Judah gets some recognition, but he's definitely a secondary figure. So it's not a compromise. It's really a document that glorifies Joseph and the Josephite tribes. It kind of leaves Judah in, at best, just a secondary place. So you'd have to imagine a scenario in which the Judean priests cooperated in the construction of a sacred document that gave them a vastly secondary place in salvation history and gave all the glory to the Samaritan tradition to the north. And this is not historically plausible.
Right. Brilliant, brilliant. So let me hit you with a possible objection that one may have. One may say, you know what, Dr. Bergsman, you got a good point. You know, there's no Zion theology. There's no focus on Jerusalem or David or anything in the Pentateuch. But there is the theme of exile all over the place. You got the patriarchs in exile. You have Israel in Egypt. You can even go back to Genesis 2, where Adam is, you know, put into this wonderful garden, which may be like a parallel to the Promised Land. He blows it. He's exiled out.